Your mind thinks roughly 60,000 thoughts every day. Most pass without notice. But some thoughts, the ones about your worth, your past mistakes, your uncertain future, these replay endlessly. They create anxiety when nothing is actually wrong. They generate suffering from thin air. This stops when you see what these thoughts actually are. Not through effort, not through replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. Through understanding how the thinking mind operates and where you exist in relation to it. The Buddha identified the exact pattern behind negative thinking. The mind takes one simple moment and spins elaborate stories from it. Someone frowns. Your mind instantly creates. They're angry. You did something wrong. The relationship is damaged. None of that existed in the frown. The mind added everything else. Over the next 3 hours, you'll hear stories of people whose minds had become prisons. Not different from you, just humans caught in patterns of thinking that created unbearable suffering. And you'll witness the exact moment when they saw through it, when the burden lifted, not because they became different people, but because they finally understood what thoughts actually are. You'll discover why your negative thoughts feel so convincing. You'll see the mechanism that gives them power, and you'll learn the single shift in perspective that makes them lose their grip. The freedom you're seeking isn't somewhere else. It's here, obscured only by misunderstanding. Let's clear that misunderstanding now. There's a moment that happens in suffering when you can no longer tell where the pain ends and your thoughts about the pain begin. The original wound, whatever caused it, gets buried under layers of thinking about it. Your mind takes the hurt and multiplies it, spins it into stories, replays it endlessly, until what started as one painful moment becomes a prison you carry everywhere. This is the first thing to understand about negative thinking. It doesn't feel like thinking. It feels like reality. The voice in your head doesn't announce itself as optional commentary. It presents itself as truth, as the accurate assessment of who you are, what happened, what will happen. And because you've never questioned whether this voice is actually you, you believe everything it says. But that voice is not you. It's a process, an automatic function of the untrained mind. Like breathing happens without your permission, thinking happens without your conscious direction. The difference is you can observe your breath without becoming it. You can watch air move in and out without confusing yourself with the breathing. But with thoughts, most people have never made that distinction. They are so completely merged with the thinking process that they cannot see it operating. This costs everything. Because when you cannot separate yourself from your thoughts, you become vulnerable to whatever the mind produces. And the mind, left to its own patterns, produces suffering with remarkable efficiency. It takes one painful experience and generates thousands of painful thoughts about it, each thought creating its own wave of emotion, each emotion triggering more thoughts, until you're drowning in something that started with a single drop of pain. The Buddha encountered this repeatedly in his teaching. People came to him not because they'd experienced tragedy. Everyone experiences tragedy. They came because their minds had taken tragedy and transformed it into something unbearable. The original pain was one thing. The mind's response to that pain was another thing entirely. And it was the mind's response, the endless thinking about the pain, that was actually destroying them. There was a king named Ajatasattu who understood this in the most devastating way possible. Ajatasattu had killed his father. Not in battle, not in defense, but deliberately, calculated. His father was King Bimbisara, a good king, beloved by his people, supporter of the Buddha's teachings. Ajatasattu, manipulated by a corrupt advisor named Devadatta, became convinced that his father planned to keep him from the throne forever. The paranoia grew until it consumed him. He imprisoned his father and left him to starve. The patricide itself was brief. Days of his father weakening, then death. Done. What happened next was where thinking became torture. Because the moment his father died, Ajatasattu's certainty evaporated. The conspiracy he'd been so sure of suddenly seemed questionable. The threat he'd perceived felt less clear. And into that uncertainty rushed a flood of thoughts that would torment him for years. What if there was no plot? What if Devadatta lied? What if my father would have stepped aside willingly when the time came? What if I killed him for nothing? The questions had no answers. But the mind doesn't stop asking just because there are no answers. It asks again and again, each repetition of the question creating another wave of agony. Each wave convincing him more deeply that he was a monster, that he'd destroyed everything that mattered, that his crime could never be undone. Then the mind moved to imagery. It began replaying the patricide, not as it actually happened, but in elaborated versions, where he could see every detail with impossible clarity. His father's face in the prison cell, his father's hunger, his father's final moments of consciousness before weakness took him. Images that may or may not have matched reality. It didn't matter. The mind was producing them now with relentless precision. And each image carried its own payload of suffering. Ajatasattu would be sitting in council meetings, making decisions about trade routes or military strategy, when suddenly his mind would insert an image of his father reaching through the prison bars. He'd be eating dinner when he'd imagine what his father's last meal might have been, how hunger must have felt as it slowly consumed him. He'd lie down to sleep and see his father's eyes, disappointed, betrayed, uncomprehending. The mind didn't wait for convenient moments. It didn't respect boundaries or timing. The thoughts came when they came, intrusive and vivid, hijacking whatever Ajatasattu was trying to focus on. Then the mind began creating conversations with the dead. What his father would say, if he could speak. What his father would ask for, if he could ask. Elaborate dialogues that felt absolutely real while they were happening. Accusations he imagined his father would level against him. Pleas he imagined his father would make. In one recurring mental conversation, his father would ask him why. Just that. Why? And Ajatasattu would try to explain about the conspiracy, about Devadatta's warnings, about his fear of never being allowed to rule. But even in his imagination, the explanations sounded hollow, unconvincing, pathetic. None of it was actually happening. His father was dead. But in Ajatasattu's experience, these conversations were as vivid and devastating as anything that had actually occurred. They had the weight of reality, even though they existed only in his mind. This is what the mind does with guilt. It doesn't just experience the guilty event and move on. It takes the event and elaborates it into 1,000 variations. Each variation creating new suffering. The original crime was one thing. The thinking mind transformed that one thing into an endless generator of fresh agony. Ajatasattu couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly, couldn't focus on ruling his kingdom. The thinking had completely taken over. He couldn't distinguish between memories, imaginings, and present reality. People around him noticed he'd become hollow, haunted, responding to voices no one else could hear. His attendants tried everything. Healers, priests, counselors. Nothing worked, because the torment wasn't happening in his body or his circumstances. It was happening in his relationship to his thoughts. Finally, someone suggested he visit the Buddha. Ajatasattu resisted at first. His father had been a devoted supporter of the Buddha's teachings. How could he face the teacher his father had loved after killing his father? But the mental torture had become unbearable. Late one night, desperate and sleepless, he went. He found the Buddha in a mango grove, teaching a small group of monks. Ajatasattu approached with his head down, shame radiating from every movement. When the Buddha looked at him, Ajatasattu expected judgment, condemnation, rejection. Instead, the Buddha's face showed only calm recognition, as if he'd been waiting, as if Ajatasattu's arrival was neither surprising nor unwelcome. "I killed my father," Ajatasattu blurted out. "I'm haunted by it. Every night, every day, his face is there. The questions won't stop. The thoughts won't end. I can't escape what I've done. The Buddha was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that began to shift everything Ajatasattu understood about his suffering. The killing itself is finished, the Buddha said. It happened in the past. What's torturing you now isn't the killing. It's your mind's endless proliferation of thoughts about the killing. You've taken one terrible action and turned it into thousands of terrible moments by replaying it, reimagining it, elaborating it. Ajatasattu stared at him. But shouldn't I feel guilty? Shouldn't I suffer for what I've done? Remorse is appropriate, the Buddha said. Learning from the action is wise. But what you're experiencing isn't remorse. It's mental torture that serves no one. Your father is gone. No amount of guilt will bring him back. All it's doing is destroying you from the inside while preventing you from doing anything good with whatever time you have left. Then the Buddha showed him something fundamental. He showed him that thoughts are events. They arise, they persist for a moment, and they pass away. Just like sounds arise and pass away. Just like physical sensations arise and pass away. Thoughts are not permanent. They're not solid. They're not you. They're phenomena appearing in consciousness and then disappearing. The thought, "I'm a murderer," arises. It seems so true, so solid, so permanent. But watch it closely. It appears, it peaks, it fades. Another thought arises to replace it. I deserve to suffer. That one seems equally true, equally solid. But it too appears and disappears. The entire stream of guilt is made of these temporary formations, each one arising, each one passing, each one replaced by another. What Ajatasattu had been doing was grabbing each thought as it arose and treating it as permanent truth. The thought, "I killed my father for nothing," would appear, and he would immediately believe it completely, and the believing would generate emotion, and the emotion would generate more thoughts, and those thoughts would be believed completely, and on and on. He was inside the process with no perspective on it, no space between the arising of the thought and the complete identification with it. The Buddha taught him to find that space, not by fighting the thoughts, not by pushing them away or pretending they weren't there, but by seeing them as they actually are, temporary formations arising and passing in the mind. When the thought, "I deserve eternal punishment," appeared, instead of immediately becoming that thought, drowning in it, being consumed by it, he learned to recognize, this is a thought. It's appearing now. It will pass. I don't have to grab it and make it solid. This recognition created a revolution in his experience. The thought still came. Guilt still arose. But he was no longer imprisoned by the thinking about the guilt. He could feel remorse without adding thousands of remorseful thoughts about his remorse. He could remember his crime without the mind immediately spinning those memories into torture. The thoughts arose, and he watched them arise, and they passed away, and he watched them pass away. And in that watching, something that had been unbearable became bearable. Not because the action was less terrible, not because he'd somehow forgiven himself or found peace with what he'd done, but because he was no longer multiplying one terrible action into infinite terrible actions through the proliferating mind. This is the essential teaching, the one that changes how you relate to every negative thought you've ever had. Your negative thinking feels overwhelming because you're treating each thought as solid truth rather than as a temporary event in consciousness. When the thought, "I'm not good enough," arises, you don't recognize it as a thought arising. You experience it as a fact being revealed. And that experiencing it as fact creates suffering far beyond what the original situation warranted. Someone criticizes your work. That's one small, painful moment. But watch what your mind does with it. Within seconds, it's generated. "I always mess things up. I'm going to get fired. I'll never be successful. Everyone thinks I'm incompetent. I should just give up." 5 new sources of suffering, all created by thinking about the original moment. And if you're identified with those thoughts, if you believe they're accurate assessments rather than automatic mental reactions, each one will generate its own emotional response, its own wave of suffering. But here's what happens when you see thoughts as thoughts. The criticism still happens. It still stings. The thought, "I messed up," still arises. But instead of that thought immediately spawning 50 related thoughts about your general incompetence and doomed future, you recognize this is a thought arising. It's appearing in response to being criticized. It's not necessarily true or false. It's just a thought, doing what thoughts do, arising in response to circumstances. And in that recognition, you have space. Space to respond skillfully instead of reactively. Space to learn if there's something to learn. Space to let the thought pass if it's just mental noise. Space to exist without being crushed by every negative evaluation your mind produces. Ajatasattu spent months working with this teaching. The Buddha didn't promise him that the guilt would disappear or that he'd forget what he'd done. What changed was his relationship to the thinking process itself. He learnt to notice when his mind started spinning stories, when it began elaborating a simple memory into a complex torture scenario. And instead of being swept away by the current, he could stand on the shore and watch the water flow past. The thoughts still came, but they no longer owned him. This is what becomes possible when you understand that thinking is not reality. It's commentary on reality, and most of that commentary is automatic, repetitive, and completely unexamined. When you bring awareness to the process, you discover something extraordinary. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices thoughts arising and passing away. And from that awareness, everything changes. The voice in your head speaks with absolute certainty. You're not good enough. You always mess this up. Everyone else can do this. Why can't you? You're too much. You're not enough. You're fundamentally flawed. This isn't occasional self-reflection or honest assessment of mistakes. This is something else entirely. A relentless internal prosecutor that reviews every action, interprets every interaction, and finds you guilty over and over again. The commentary never stops. Even when you're trying to sleep, even when you're doing something that should be pleasant, it catalogues your inadequacies, predicts your failures, reminds you of every time you didn't measure up. What makes this exhausting is how convincing it sounds. The harsh voice doesn't present itself as one possible interpretation among many. It presents itself as objective reality, as if the universe itself is speaking through your thoughts to deliver the accurate assessment you've been trying to avoid. And because it's coming from inside your own head, in your own voice, questioning it feels like denying the truth. The ancient Buddhist texts contain a story about a nun named Uttara who knew this voice intimately. Her struggle with it, and what she discovered about its nature, offers something more useful than reassurance or positive thinking. It offers a way to see through the entire mechanism. Uttara had entered monastic life seeking peace. She'd taken the vows, shaved her head, put on the robes, and committed herself completely to the practice. On the surface, everything looked right. She attended all the teachings, followed all the precepts, meditated according to instruction. But internally, she was at war with herself. The commentary in her mind was constant and brutal. During meditation, instead of settling into stillness, she would think, "You're doing this wrong. Everyone else achieved concentration weeks ago. You're the only one whose mind still wanders like this. You'll never progress on this path." When she made a mistake, forgetting a precept, missing a teaching, saying something unskillful, the voice escalated. "See? You're not cut out for this. Real practitioners don't struggle like you do. You're wasting everyone's time by being here." Even when she did something well, the voice found angles of attack. If she had a good meditation session, that was probably just luck. Tomorrow you'll fail again. If another nun praised her understanding of a teaching, she's just being polite. She doesn't know how confused you really are. The exhaustion of this was profound. Uttara wasn't just trying to train her mind in meditation. She was simultaneously trying to defend herself against her own thoughts. Every moment became a trial, where she was both the accused and the prosecutor, and the verdict was always guilty. What made it worse was that she believed this harsh judgment was necessary. She thought that if she stopped criticizing herself, she would become complacent, lazy, unwilling to improve. The harsh voice presented itself as the only thing keeping her on track. Without it, surely she would fail completely. So she endured. She continued practicing, while internally attacking herself for how she practiced. She continued trying to achieve peace, while creating constant war in her own mind. And predictably, this approach didn't lead to liberation. It led to more suffering. One day, completely worn down by the relentless self-judgment, Uttara went to speak with an elder nun who had achieved deep realization. She described the constant criticism, the feeling of never being good enough, the exhaustion of trying to practice, while simultaneously judging every moment of practice. The elder nun listened carefully, then asked a simple question: who is being judged? Uttara was confused. I am, she said. Me. I'm the one who's not good enough, who keeps failing, who doesn't measure up. And who is doing the judging? The elder nun asked. Also me, Uttara said, feeling the absurdity of it, even as she spoke. I'm judging myself. The elder nun smiled gently. So one part of you judges another part of you. Which one is the real you? Uttara opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. She didn't know. When she tried to locate this self that was being judged, all she found were thoughts, feelings, sensations, but no solid thing that could be called Uttara in any permanent sense. And when she tried to locate the self that was judging, again, just thoughts arising, harsh thoughts, critical thoughts, but still just thoughts appearing in awareness. The elder nun continued, You're treating thought patterns as if they're making accurate statements about a real, fixed thing called you. But look carefully at your actual experience. What you call Uttara is a flow of phenomena, sensations arising and passing, thoughts appearing and disappearing, emotions forming and dissolving. No separate thing stands apart from this flow that can be judged, just the flow itself. This wasn't philosophical abstraction. The elder nun was pointing Uttara toward direct observation of her actual experience in each moment. Right now, the elder nun said, notice the breath moving in your body. Is the breath Uttara? Is the sensation of sitting Uttara? Is the sound of my voice Uttara? Where is this solid, permanent thing that your thoughts claim to be describing? Uttara looked, and the more closely she looked, the less she could find any fixed self to judge. Hearing was happening, but no hearer that could be called inadequate. Thinking was happening, but no thinker that could be deemed a failure. Breathing was happening, but no permanent entity doing the breathing that could be found lacking. The harsh judgments arise, the elder nun explained, because of confusion about what's actually happening. Thoughts appear that claim to be describing a real, solid you, and then other thoughts appear that judge this imaginary solid thing as inadequate. But both the image being judged and the judge doing the judging are just thought patterns appearing temporarily in awareness. She paused, letting this settle. It's like watching a play where one character criticizes another character, and you've become so absorbed in the drama that you've forgotten you're watching a play. The characters seem real while the performance runs. But when you step back and see it as a play, temporary performances appearing and disappearing, the whole thing loses its power to convince you. Uttara began practicing with this understanding. When harsh self-judgment arose, instead of either believing it or fighting against it, she simply observed, this is a thought pattern appearing. It's claiming to describe something solid and permanent called me, but when I look for this solid thing, it's not there. Just this moment's experience, arising, existing briefly, passing away. At first, the judgmental thoughts continued arising just as strongly, but something had shifted in how she related to them. Instead of experiencing them as truth about Uttara, she experienced them as temporary mental events, no more solid or permanent than a cloud passing through the sky. The thoughts said, "You're failing," but when she looked for the solid you that was supposedly failing, she found only breath moving, body sitting, awareness, knowing. The thoughts said, "You're not good enough," but when she searched for this permanent, inadequate self, she found only phenomena flowing, seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling. None of it solid enough to be called Uttara in any lasting way. This wasn't positive thinking replacing negative thinking. It wasn't affirmations countering criticisms. It was something more fundamental, seeing through the basic confusion that makes self-judgment possible in the first place. Self-judgment requires two things: a solid self that can be judged, and thoughts that can deliver accurate verdicts about this self. But when Uttara looked carefully at her actual experience, she couldn't find either. No fixed thing to judge existed, and the judging thoughts themselves were just more temporary phenomena flowing through awareness. Over time, as this understanding deepened, the harsh commentary lost its grip. Thoughts of inadequacy still arose sometimes. Old patterns don't disappear instantly, but they no longer had the same convincing quality. They were like actors in a play she was no longer absorbed in, characters speaking lines that couldn't touch what she actually was, the aware space in which all these temporary phenomena appeared and disappeared. The Buddhist teaching that helped Uttara is sometimes stated simply, no permanent, unchanging self exists. But this isn't meant as a philosophical position to adopt. It's meant as an invitation to look directly at your actual experience. Right now, as you listen to these words, what are you actually experiencing? Hearing is happening, words appearing, meaning forming. Perhaps some background sound exists in your environment. Sensations exist where your body contacts whatever you're sitting or lying on. Thoughts might be arising about what you're hearing, reactions forming, agreements or disagreements appearing. But where, in all of this, is the solid, permanent you that your harsh thoughts claim to be describing? When you look for it, you find only this flow of phenomena: seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, arising, and passing, moment by moment. The harsh inner critic creates an image of you, inadequate, failing, not good enough, and treats this image as if it's describing something real and permanent. But the image itself is just another thought pattern, another temporary appearance in the flow of experience. This matters enormously for dealing with self-judgment. You cannot win an argument with the harsh inner voice using its own terms. If you try to prove you're actually good enough, adequate, worthy, you're still accepting the premise that a solid self exists that can be accurately judged as either good enough or not good enough. You're just arguing about the verdict while accepting the validity of the trial. What Uttara discovered offers a different approach entirely. See through the confused assumption that makes the trial possible in the first place. When harsh self-judgment arises, you can investigate: where is this solid, permanent self that these thoughts are claiming to describe? Not as a philosophical question, but as direct observation of this moment's actual experience. You find breathing happening, but no permanent breather. You find thinking happening, but no solid thinker. You find awareness of all this, but the awareness itself doesn't match any of the characteristics the harsh thoughts attribute to you. It's not inadequate or adequate, not failing or succeeding, not anything that can be captured by these judgments. The judgmental thoughts can still arise. Old patterns have momentum, but when you see them as temporary thought events appearing in awareness rather than accurate descriptions of a permanent self, they lose their power to create suffering. Consider the difference between being lost in a nightmare and knowing you're dreaming. The nightmare images might still be appearing, but they can't convince you anymore because you've seen through what they are: temporary appearances in awareness, not solid reality. Uttara didn't eliminate self-judgment by becoming more perfect, or by achieving some ideal version of herself that the harsh voice would finally approve of. She eliminated it by discovering that the whole drama of self-judgment was based on a fundamental misunderstanding about what she actually was. She was not a solid, permanent thing that could be judged. She was, and you are, a flowing process of experience, moment by moment, with no fixed entity at the center that the harsh thoughts are describing. When you truly see this, not as a belief, but as direct recognition, the endless commentary that judges everything finally has nothing to attach to. It's like trying to hit a target that was never there in the first place. The judging thoughts might continue arising for a while. Patterns have momentum, but they're arising in a space that sees them clearly. Temporary appearances, like clouds passing through sky, unable to define or limit what you actually are. This discovery changes everything about how you relate to the harsh inner voice. Instead of fighting it, instead of trying to convince it you're actually good enough, you see that it's been arguing with a phantom. The solid, permanent, inadequate self it's been describing doesn't exist and has never existed. What exists is this moment's flowing experience, breath, sensation, sound, thought, and none of it forms into the kind of fixed entity that can be accurately judged as fundamentally flawed. This isn't about achieving perfection so the voice finally approves. This isn't about developing enough self-esteem to withstand the criticism. This is about looking directly at what you actually are in this moment and discovering that the entire premise of self-judgment, that a solid self exists to be judged, is mistaken from the start. Uttara spent years believing the harsh commentary was telling her truth about herself. Then she discovered it was describing something that had never been there at all. What liberation this brought, not because she finally measured up, but because she saw through the measurement itself. Tonight, if the harsh inner voice is speaking, you don't have to argue with it or try to replace it with better thoughts. You can look for what it's claiming to describe, this solid, permanent, inadequate self. And when you look carefully, not philosophically, but directly at this moment's actual experience, you won't find it. You'll find only the flowing river of experience itself, which cannot be judged because it's never solid enough to capture. That's what Uttara discovered. That's what freed her from the tyranny of self-judgment. Not perfection, not finally becoming good enough, but seeing clearly that the whole trial was based on mistaken identity from the start. In a dense forest, a monkey sat beneath a tree, eating fruit. The forest was peaceful, filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. The monkey had lived here his entire life and knew every tree, every path, every sound. Then something fell from the tree above him. Just a piece of fruit, dislodged by the wind. It struck the ground with a thump. But the monkey, startled from his contentment, didn't investigate what had fallen. His mind immediately constructed a story. The sky is falling. The sky is breaking apart and falling down. The entire world is collapsing. Terror seized him. He leapt from his spot and began running through the forest, screaming, "The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Run for your lives." A rabbit heard the screaming and saw the monkey's terror. She didn't stop to question whether the sky was actually falling. She saw genuine panic and assumed it must be warranted. She began running too, screaming the same warning to every animal she passed. The panic spread like flames through dry grass. A deer heard the screaming, saw two animals in full flight, and joined the stampede without asking what they were fleeing from. A wild boar heard the commotion, saw three animals running in terror, and concluded that disaster must be imminent. A buffalo, an elephant, birds in the trees, one by one, every animal in the forest joined the panicked flight. None of them stopped to look up and check if the sky was actually falling. None of them investigated the source of the panic. They simply saw others in terror and concluded that their terror must be justified. The stampede grew larger and more frenzied. Animals were trampled in the chaos. The weakest creatures couldn't keep up and were left behind, paralyzed with fear. The entire forest ecosystem was being destroyed not by any actual disaster, but by the belief that disaster was happening. At the edge of the forest lived a lion, old and wise from years of experience. He heard the commotion approaching, the thundering of thousands of feet, the terrified screaming, the sound of branches breaking as panicked animals crashed through the undergrowth. The lion stepped into the path of the stampede. His mere presence was enough to slow the front of the fleeing horde. Animals instinctively stopped when faced with a lion, even in their panic. "Why are you running?" the lion called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. "What are you fleeing from?" "The sky is falling," they screamed. "The sky is breaking apart. We must run, or we'll all be crushed." The lion didn't move. "Who saw the sky falling?" he asked. The animals in front pointed behind them. "They told us. They saw it." The lion called to those animals. "Did you see the sky falling?" "No," they admitted, "but the ones behind us, they're the ones who saw it. They started running first." The lion moved through the crowd, asking the same question to each group of animals. Each group pointed to someone else as the source of the information. Each claimed they were just responding to a warning they'd received. Finally, the lion reached the monkey, still screaming and trying to push through the crowd to continue fleeing. "You," the lion said firmly. "Did you see the sky falling?" "Yes," the monkey shrieked. "I was sitting under the tree and the sky fell. I heard it crash down. We have to run." "Show me," the lion said. "We don't have time," the monkey protested. "The sky is falling right now. We'll all die if we don't keep moving." But the lion's presence was not something the monkey could ignore or flee from. Reluctantly, still trembling with terror, the monkey led the lion back to the spot beneath the tree. "Here," the monkey said, pointing at the ground. "This is where the sky fell. I heard it crash right here." The lion looked at the ground. He saw the piece of fruit that had fallen. He looked up at the tree, heavy with fruit. He looked at the sky above, intact, unchanged, exactly as it had always been. "That," the lion said quietly, "is a piece of fruit." The monkey stared at the fruit on the ground. He stared at the tree above. He looked up at the sky, solid and blue, and showing no signs of collapse. The catastrophe he'd been certain of, the disaster he'd bet his life on, the crisis that had seemed so real it had mobilized an entire forest, had never existed at all. What had existed was a piece of fruit falling and a mind that immediately constructed disaster from a single unexplained sound. The lion led the monkey back to the stampeding animals. He showed them the fruit. He showed them the intact sky. He explained what had actually happened. A single startled monkey had misinterpreted a sound, and every other animal had believed the panic without checking the facts. The animals stood in silence, looking at each other. The forest slowly settled. Animals returned to where they'd been, and the monkey, sitting once more beneath his tree, was forever changed by the recognition of how quickly his mind had turned a falling fruit into the end of the world. This ancient teaching story maps perfectly onto how catastrophic thinking operates in the human mind. Something small happens. A text goes unanswered. A meeting gets rescheduled. A slight pain appears in your chest, and within seconds, your mind has constructed an entire catastrophe. The unanswered text means they're angry with you, which means the friendship is over, which means you'll lose your entire social circle, which means you'll end up isolated and alone. The rescheduled meeting means your boss is unhappy with your work, which means you're about to be fired, which means you won't be able to pay rent, which means you'll lose everything you've built. The chest pain means a heart attack, which means emergency surgery, which means medical bankruptcy, which means your life, as you know, it is about to collapse. Like the monkey hearing the fruit fall, your mind doesn't pause to investigate the actual situation. It immediately generates the catastrophe narrative and treats that narrative as if it's already happening. The key word is ambiguous. If the situation were clearly dangerous, your fear response would be appropriate. But catastrophic thinking activates for ambiguous situations, situations that could mean many different things, but your mind immediately selects the worst possible interpretation. Then your body responds to the imagined catastrophe as if it's real. Your heart races, your breath shortens, stress chemicals flood your system. This physical response becomes more evidence that the catastrophe is real. My heart is racing, so something must really be wrong. My body wouldn't react this way if I wasn't in actual danger. This is exactly what happened in the forest. Each animal saw the previous animal's genuine terror and took that terror as confirmation that disaster was real. The monkey's racing heart convinced the rabbit. The rabbit's fleeing convinced the deer. The physical signs of panic in others became proof that panic was warranted. The spiral feeds itself. The catastrophic thought creates physical sensations of fear. The physical sensations are interpreted as evidence that the catastrophic thought is accurate. This interpretation intensifies the fear, which creates stronger physical sensations, which provide more evidence, which intensifies the fear further. Within minutes, you're in full-blown panic over something that hasn't happened and may never happen. Your body is responding to an imagined future as if it's occurring right now. What stops this spiral? The same thing that stopped it in the forest: investigation of the actual facts, rather than belief in the panic narrative. The lion didn't argue with the animals about whether they should be afraid. He didn't try to convince them they were overreacting. He simply asked, what actually happened? Who actually saw the sky falling? Let's go look at the evidence. When catastrophic thinking has seized your mind, arguing with it doesn't work. Telling yourself, don't worry, it's probably fine, doesn't stop the spiral, because part of you believes the catastrophe is genuinely imminent. What works is what the lion did. Investigate the actual situation rather than the story about the situation. Your friend hasn't responded to your text. That's the actual situation. A text sent, no response yet. Your mind has added, they're angry, they hate you, the friendship is over, you'll lose everyone. These additions are not facts. They're interpretations, predictions, catastrophic narratives constructed from ambiguous data. When you notice catastrophic thinking happening, you can ask the lion's question, what actually happened? Not what might happen, not what probably will happen, not what your thoughts are predicting will happen. What has actually happened right now in reality? Often the answer is surprisingly small. A text went unanswered. A meeting got rescheduled. A pain appeared in your chest. These are the facts. Concrete, specific, happening in the present moment. Everything else, the angry friend, the job loss, the medical emergency, the complete life collapse, exists only as thought about a possible future, not as something happening right now. This distinction matters enormously. When you're caught in catastrophic thinking, your body is responding to an imagined future disaster as if it's a present moment threat. But when you bring your attention back to what's actually happening right now, you often find that, right now, in this moment, you're safe. Right now, you're breathing. Right now, your body is functioning. Right now, the catastrophe exists only as thought, not as reality. This doesn't mean the future won't contain difficulties. Your friend might actually be upset. Your job might be in jeopardy. You might need medical attention. But constructing elaborate catastrophe scenarios about these possibilities doesn't prepare you for them. It exhausts you before anything has actually gone wrong. The monkey spent enormous energy fleeing from a disaster that wasn't happening. That energy could have been used for actual challenges. Instead, it was completely depleted by responding to an imaginary crisis. When you spend your mental and emotional resources responding to catastrophes that exist only in thought, you have less available for actual difficulties when they arise. You exhaust yourself with imaginary problems and then face real problems already depleted. The teaching here isn't, "Don't worry, everything will be fine." The teaching is, distinguish between what's actually happening and what your thoughts are predicting might happen. Respond to reality, not to catastrophic imagination. When the lion investigated the source of the panic, he found a piece of fruit and an intact sky. When you investigate the source of your catastrophic thinking, you often find something similarly small at the root, an ambiguous situation that your mind has transformed into certainty of disaster. Tonight, if your mind is predicting catastrophe, remember the monkey and the lion. Notice that catastrophic thinking is happening. Then ask, what has actually happened right now? Not what might happen, not what you're afraid will happen, but what has concretely occurred in reality. Bring your attention back from the imagined future to the present moment. Often you'll find that in this moment, right now, the catastrophe hasn't arrived. It exists only as thought about a possible future. The monkey learned that a mind left uninvestigated will transform fruit falling into sky falling. The lion taught that investigation stops the spiral, not argument, not reassurance, but simple, clear seeing of what's actually true versus what's imagined. That same wisdom is available to you when catastrophic thinking begins its familiar cascade. You can be your own lion, stepping into the path of the panic, asking what actually happened, investigating the facts, rather than believing the catastrophe narrative. The sky is not falling. It almost never is. But your mind will tell you it's falling dozens of times a day. And each time you have a choice, believe the panic or investigate the truth. The forest full of animals learned this the hard way, exhausted and frightened by a catastrophe that never existed. You can learn it differently by catching the mechanism as it happens, questioning the narrative before it takes over, and returning again and again to what's actually true in this moment, rather than what might be true in an imagined future. That's how the spiral stops. Not through forced optimism or denial of real challenges, but through clear seeing of the difference between reality and catastrophic imagination. Your mind returns to the same moment again and again. The conversation where you said the wrong thing, the relationship that ended, the opportunity you didn't take, the loss you can't accept. Your thoughts circle back to these moments dozens of times a day, replaying them with slight variations, analyzing what you should have done differently, imagining alternate outcomes that will never occur. This isn't occasional remembering. This is rumination, the repetitive, stuck quality of a mind that can't let go of what's already finished. You know, rationally, that replaying the past doesn't change it. You know that thinking about it one more time won't reveal some new insight that makes everything make sense. But your mind returns to it anyway, compulsively, like touching a bruise to see if it still hurts. The Buddhist teaching texts contain a story about exactly this kind of imprisonment in the past and what it takes to finally let go. Queen Ubari had everything a person could want: wealth, position, respect, a loving family, and she had a daughter she adored with an intensity that consumed her entire heart. She poured everything into this child. Every moment of joy centered around her daughter's laughter. Every plan for the future included her daughter's presence. The queen's identity, her sense of meaning, her reason for existing, all of it revolved around this one beloved person. Then her daughter died. The grief was immediate and total. But what came after the initial shock was worse: the inability to move forward, the compulsive return to memories of what had been lost, the replaying of final moments, the endless variations of if only. If only she'd noticed the illness sooner. If only she'd called different physicians. If only she'd kept her daughter closer, protected her better, somehow prevented the inevitable. Queen Ubari withdrew from her life. She stopped attending to her duties. She stopped speaking to her husband. She spent her days in her daughter's room, touching her daughter's belongings, replaying every conversation they'd ever had, imagining different endings where her daughter still lived. Her mind became a prison of the past. She wasn't living in the present moment. She was living in an endless loop of memory and regret, replaying what had happened, imagining what should have happened, unable to accept what actually was. Months passed this way. Her family tried to reach her, but she couldn't hear them. Her responsibilities accumulated, but she couldn't address them. She existed in a kind of walking death, physically present, but mentally trapped in a past she couldn't change. A wandering teacher came to the palace. He'd heard about the queen's inconsolable grief and asked to speak with her. She didn't want to see him. She didn't want to see anyone. But something in his presence was different from the well-meaning relatives who'd tried to console her with empty reassurances that time heals all wounds. "Your daughter," the teacher said quietly, "was she the first person in the world to die?" The question was so unexpected that it cut through the fog of the queen's grief. "Of course not," she said. "Was she the first child to die before her parents?" "No." "Will she be the last?" The queen sat in silence. She knew the answers to these questions. Death was not unique to her daughter. Grief was not unique to her. This unbearable thing that felt like it was happening only to her was, in fact, part of the universal human experience. "Go into the city," the teacher said. "Find me a household that has never experienced death. Bring me proof of such a place, and I will give you what you're seeking." The queen didn't understand what he was offering or why this task mattered. But she needed something, anything, that might ease the unbearable weight she carried. So she went into the city. She knocked on the first door she came to. "Has anyone in this household died?" she asked. "My father died last year," the man who answered said. "I still think about him every day." She went to the next house. "Has anyone here died?" "My wife," an old man said, his eyes filling with tears. "6 months ago, the house feels empty without her." House after house, she asked the same question. And house after house, people shared their losses. A brother who died in an accident, a mother who'd succumbed to illness, a child who'd been stillborn, an elderly grandparent who'd passed peacefully in sleep. Every single household had experienced death. Every single person she spoke with carried their own grief, their own memories of someone they'd loved and lost. As the day wore on, something in the queen began to shift. She saw that her grief, while deeply personal and real, was also universal. She saw that she'd been holding her loss as if it were unique, as if she alone had been singled out for this unbearable experience. But everyone had lost someone. Everyone carried memories of people who were gone. She returned to the teacher empty-handed. "There is no household untouched by death," she said. "No," the teacher agreed. "There is not, and there never will be. Death is not a punishment visited upon you alone. It's part of being alive. Everyone you spoke with today carries what you carry. The question is, will you let this loss consume the rest of your life, or will you learn to carry it while still living?" The queen felt something break open inside her. Not the grief itself. That remained and would remain. But the story she'd been telling herself about the grief broke apart. The belief that this should not have happened. The conviction that if she just replayed it enough times, she could somehow change the outcome. The certainty that her life had to stop because her daughter's life had stopped. She saw that she'd been grieving not just her daughter, but her ideas about how life should be. She'd been rejecting reality so completely that she'd withdrawn from all of life rather than accept this one unbearable fact. "Your daughter is gone," the teacher said gently. "That's true. That will always be true. But you are still here. And every moment you spend replaying the past is a moment you're not living the life that remains available to you." This story captures the essential mechanism of rumination. When you ruminate, you're not simply remembering the past. You're replaying it compulsively, analyzing it obsessively, imagining alternate versions, trying to somehow undo what already happened through the sheer force of repeated thinking. Queen Obari spent months in her daughter's room, touching her daughter's belongings, replaying memories. This wasn't helping her process grief. It was keeping her trapped in a mental loop where she never had to accept that her daughter was truly gone. Your mind does the same thing. You replay the conversation where you said the wrong thing, imagining what you should have said instead. You revisit the relationship that ended, analyzing every moment for clues about where it went wrong. You relive the opportunity you didn't take, constructing elaborate fantasies about how your life would be different if only you'd made a different choice. The replaying feels purposeful. It feels like you're working through something, making progress toward understanding or resolution. But rumination is circular, not linear. You're not moving toward understanding. You're walking the same mental path over and over, wearing a groove deeper into your consciousness with each repetition. There's a crucial difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection examines the past to learn from it, then moves forward with that learning. Reflection asks, what can I understand from this experience? What can I carry forward into the future? Reflection has a purpose and an end point. Rumination has no end point. Rumination circles endlessly through the same material without arriving anywhere new. It asks the same questions repeatedly without genuinely seeking answers. It replays the same scenes without ever finding the resolution it's searching for. Queen Obari's obsessive dwelling on her daughter's death wasn't helping her understand or accept what had happened. It was keeping her from accepting it. As long as she stayed mentally trapped in the past, she didn't have to face the present reality of her daughter's absence. This is what rumination does. It creates the illusion of engagement while actually functioning as avoidance. You think you're processing the past when you're actually refusing to let it be past. You think you're seeking resolution when you're actually avoiding acceptance. The past, once it's finished, exists only as memory. You can't change what happened. You can't go back and say different words, make different choices, prevent different outcomes. The events are complete. They're sealed in time. What you can change is your relationship to the memory. You can choose whether to spend your present moment awareness trapped in repetitive loops about what's already finished, or whether to release your grip on the unchangeable past and direct your attention toward what's actually alive and available right now. This doesn't mean forgetting. Queen Obari never forgot her daughter. The grief didn't disappear, but she stopped using the past as a refuge from the present. She stopped replaying what had happened, as if repeated analysis could somehow alter the outcome. What changed was her willingness to accept reality. Her daughter had died. This was unbearably painful, and it was true. She could either spend the rest of her life rejecting this truth through obsessive rumination, or she could acknowledge it fully and discover what life remained possible, even with this enormous loss. The teacher's task, finding a household untouched by death, showed her something essential. She wasn't alone in her suffering. Everyone carried losses. Everyone had pasts they couldn't change. The difference was whether they let those unchangeable pasts consume their present moment lives. When you catch yourself ruminating, you can ask the question that helped free Queen Ubari. Is replaying this moment one more time changing anything? The honest answer is almost always no. Thinking about the conversation for the 100th time doesn't alter what you said. Replaying the relationship's end for the 1000th time doesn't bring the person back. Imagining different choices doesn't undo the choices you actually made. The past is finished. What remains is memory and your choice about how much of your present moment awareness to invest in repetitive loops about what can't be changed. This isn't about positive thinking or forcing yourself to move on before you're ready. Grief needs time. Processing difficult experiences takes time. But there's a difference between giving something the time it needs and imprisoning yourself in an endless loop that never resolves. Queen Ubari's grief didn't end when she stopped ruminating, but her imprisonment in the past ended. She learned to carry her loss while still engaging with the life that remained available to her. You can do the same. Notice when your mind returns to the same past moment for the 100th time. Notice the familiar groove of the rumination, the well-worn path your thoughts travel. Then ask, is this repetition serving me, or is it keeping me trapped? If the answer is that it's keeping you trapped, you can make a different choice. You can acknowledge the thought, yes, this happened and I wish it had gone differently, and then deliberately redirect your attention to what's actually present and alive in this moment. Not because the past doesn't matter, but because the past is finished and you are still here, and the present moment offers possibilities that rumination closes off. The Queen learned that everyone she met had lost someone beloved. Everyone carried unchangeable pasts. The question wasn't whether loss happened. It happened to everyone. The question was whether you let loss consume the life that remained, or whether you learned to carry it while still living. Tonight, if you find your mind returning to the same past moment again and again, remember Queen Ubari in her daughter's room. Remember that replaying the past doesn't change it. Remember that rumination feels like engagement, but functions as imprisonment. And then, gently, see if you can release your grip on what's already finished. Not forgetting it, not dismissing it, but letting it be past, rather than insisting it remain eternally present in your consciousness. The past happened. You can't change that, but you can choose how much of your present awareness to invest in repetitive loops about what's already complete. You can choose whether to remain imprisoned in rumination or to engage with what's actually alive and available right now. That choice between rumination and presence is available to you in every moment. The past will call you back repeatedly. Your mind will offer the familiar groove of the rumination loop. And each time, you can choose, follow that loop one more time, or redirect your attention to the life that's actually happening now. That's where freedom lives. Not in changing what already happened, but in releasing your grip on the unchangeable and turning your attention toward what remains possible. The mirror becomes a battleground. You examine your reflection with a scrutiny you'd never apply to anyone else, cataloging every flaw, every sign of aging, every deviation from whatever impossible standard your mind has constructed. Your thoughts spiral into harsh judgments about your appearance, and these judgments bleed into judgments about your worth as a person. Or maybe it's not your own eyes judging you. Maybe it's the constant awareness of being looked at, evaluated, reduced to your physical appearance by others. You walk through the world feeling like your body is public property, subject to commentary and assessment, and you can't escape the weight of all those eyes. This preoccupation with appearance, your own harsh evaluation, or your entrapment by others' evaluations, consumes enormous mental energy. It shapes how you move through the world, what you avoid, what you pursue, how you feel about yourself on any given day. The Buddhist texts contain a teaching story so dramatic, so shocking, that it cuts through centuries of polite spiritual discourse to show what's actually at stake when we're trapped by appearance-based thinking. Suba was a young nun who'd left her family's wealth to pursue freedom through Buddhist practice. She was known for two things: her dedicated meditation practice and her extraordinarily beautiful eyes. One day, walking alone on a forest path, she encountered a young man. He saw her eyes and became instantly obsessed. He blocked her path, demanding her attention, insisting she abandon her spiritual practice to become his wife. "Your eyes," he said, "are like jewels. They're perfect. You shouldn't waste such beauty in a monastery. You should be with someone who can appreciate how beautiful you are." Subha tried to walk around him. He blocked her path again. She tried to reason with him, explaining that she'd chosen this life deliberately, that she had no interest in what he was offering. He ignored her words entirely, continuing to fixate on her appearance, on her eyes specifically, as if that's all she was, a beautiful object for him to possess. She realized he wasn't hearing her. He wasn't seeing her as a person with her own intentions, her own path, her own freedom. He was seeing only her physical appearance, and that appearance had become an obstacle she couldn't talk her way past. So Subha did something shocking. She plucked out one of her own eyes and held it out to him. "Here," she said. "You want this so badly. Take it. This is what you're obsessing over. Just flesh, just moisture, just a temporary construction that will decay like everything else." The young man recoiled in horror. The beautiful eye, separated from the face, was suddenly revealed as what it had always been: an organ, a biological structure, subject to decay, nothing remotely jewel-like when seen clearly. His obsession broke instantly. He fell to his knees, overcome with remorse for having objectified her so completely, for having reduced an entire human being to a single physical feature. Suba's eye was later miraculously restored. The texts emphasize this wasn't self-harm, but a teaching demonstration. But what remained after the encounter was the shocking clarity of what she'd revealed, that the physical appearance we obsess over, whether our own or others, is temporary, constructed, and ultimately not what we actually are. This story is extreme by design. It's meant to jolt you out of comfortable assumptions about beauty, appearance, and where your worth actually resides. When you stand before a mirror and criticize your appearance, you're making the same mistake the young man made, treating your physical form as if it's your essential self, as if your worth is determined by how this temporary structure currently looks. The body you're judging so harshly is in constant flux. The face you see today is not the face you saw 10 years ago, and will not be the face you see 10 years from now. Every cell is being replaced. Every structure is aging. Everything is changing continuously. What you're judging is a snapshot of a process that never holds still long enough to be the solid, permanent thing your thoughts treat it as. Subha's dramatic action revealed this truth viscerally. The beautiful eye, when separated from the living face, was just tissue. The object of obsession, when seen clearly, was impermanent, subject to decay, nothing that could bear the weight of all that fixation. Your appearance is the same. When you examine yourself in the mirror with that harsh, critical eye, you're relating to your body as if it's a permanent, solid thing that should look a certain way. But it's not permanent. It's not solid. It's a temporary construction of flesh, bone, moisture, and air that changes every single day and will eventually dissolve completely. This isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to be liberating. If your body is temporary and constantly changing, then any judgment about it is a judgment about something that won't hold the same form long enough for the judgment to remain accurate. You're criticizing a moving target, treating a fluid process as if it's a fixed object that can be definitively evaluated. More importantly, if your body is temporary and changing, then it can't be where your fundamental worth resides. Your worth can't depend on something that's different every decade, every year, every moment. It has to be based on something deeper than this temporary physical form. The young man's obsession with Subha's eyes was also a form of negative thinking, not self-criticism, but the reduction of another person to their physical appearance, the objectification that treats people as things to be evaluated, rather than as complete human beings with their own inner lives. You experience this too. You walk through the world aware of being looked at, evaluated, reduced to your appearance by others, You feel the weight of those gazes, the way they assess and judge and sometimes objectify. This awareness can become its own form of imprisonment, always conscious of how you're being perceived, unable to simply exist without that evaluative layer. Subha's response showed that you're not required to accept others' objectification of you. You don't have to internalize their evaluations. You don't have to let their fixation on your appearance determine your sense of worth or freedom. When she held out her own eye, she was essentially saying, "This thing you're obsessing over, it's not me. It's a temporary part of a temporary form. Your fixation on it reveals your confusion about what I actually am." You can hold the same clarity when you're trapped by appearance-based thinking, whether it's your own harsh self-evaluation or your entrapment by others' objectifying gazes. You are not your appearance. Your worth is not determined by how your temporary physical form currently looks. You are the awareness that experiences life through this form, not the form itself. This doesn't mean neglecting basic care of your body or pretending appearance has no social impact. It means not treating your physical form as if it's your essential self, not allowing your worth to rise and fall based on how this changing structure currently looks. When you notice harsh thoughts about your appearance arising, you can ask Subha's question, "What am I actually criticizing here?" You're criticizing a temporary construction that's different today than it was yesterday, and will be different tomorrow than it is today. You're judging something that won't hold still long enough to be the fixed object your thoughts treat it as. You're basing your sense of worth on something that's inherently unreliable because it's constantly changing. The recognition that your body is temporary doesn't make it worthless. It makes it precious in a different way. Precious because it's the vehicle through which you experience life, not precious because it meets certain appearance standards. Subha valued her body enough to take care of it, to use it as a vehicle for meditation and practice. But she didn't confuse the vehicle with the traveler. She didn't let her worth become dependent on how the vehicle looked to others. You can make the same distinction. Care for your body because it's the form through which you experience life, not because its appearance determines your worth. Appreciate its function rather than obsessing over its form. When others reduce you to your appearance, you can hold Subha's clarity. Their objectification is their confusion, not your reality. You don't have to internalize their limited perception of you. You don't have to let their fixation on your physical form define your sense of self. This is radically different from the usual advice about body image, which often amounts to trying to think more positive thoughts about your appearance. Subha's teaching isn't about learning to think your body is beautiful instead of ugly. It's about recognizing that your worth doesn't depend on appearance at all, because you're not fundamentally a physical form being evaluated. Your awareness experiencing life through a temporary, changing form. The shift is from, "I need to look better," or "I need to accept how I look," to My appearance is a temporary aspect of a temporary form, and my worth exists independent of how this form currently looks. This doesn't happen all at once. Appearance-based thinking has deep roots, cultivated by years of social conditioning, media messages, others' evaluations, and your own internalized criticism. You won't hear Subha's story once and suddenly be free of all appearance concerns. But you can begin to notice when appearance-based thoughts arise and recognize them for what they are, thoughts about a temporary form, not truths about your fundamental worth. You can catch yourself in front of the mirror, cataloging flaws, and ask, what am I treating as permanent here that's actually constantly changing? You can feel the weight of others' evaluative gazes, and remember, their fixation on my appearance is their confusion, not my reality. Gradually, with repeated recognition, the grip of appearance-based thinking loosens. Not because you've learned to think your body is perfect, but because you've seen through the confused assumption that your worth depends on how your temporary form currently looks. Tonight, if you find yourself trapped in harsh judgments about your appearance or weighed down by others' objectifying evaluations, remember Subha holding out her own eye. Remember the shock of seeing that the object of obsession, when seen clearly, was just temporary tissue, nothing that could bear the weight of all that fixation. Your body is the same. Temporary, changing, not your essential self. It's the vehicle through which you experience life, worthy of care for that reason, but not the source of your fundamental worth. You are not your appearance. You are the awareness experiencing life through this temporary form, and that awareness doesn't improve or diminish based on how the form currently looks. That recognition, clear, direct, uncompromising, is what Subha's dramatic teaching offers. Not comfort, not reassurance, but liberation through seeing what's actually true. Your worth exists independent of appearance because you are not fundamentally the temporary form being evaluated. Hold that clarity when appearance-based thoughts arise. You don't have to argue with the thoughts or try to think differently about how you look. You can simply see them for what they are, evaluations of something temporary, treating a changing process as if it's a fixed object, confusing the vehicle with what travels through it. That seeing is enough. Not to eliminate all appearance concerns immediately, but to begin loosening the grip of the confusion that makes appearance seem like the measure of your worth. Subha knew what she was. Not beautiful eyes, not a body to be evaluated, but awareness itself, experiencing life through temporary form. That knowing set her free. The same knowing is available to you. Soma sat in meditation under a tree, her mind settled and clear. She'd been practicing for years, had left behind her former life to pursue awakening, and her understanding had deepened to the point where genuine freedom felt close. Then, a voice spoke from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" the voice asked, mocking and certain. "Do you really think someone like you can reach enlightenment? This path is for the wise, the exceptional, the truly capable. You're wasting your time." The voice belonged to Mara, in Buddhist teaching, the personification of doubt, distraction, and everything that keeps you trapped in suffering. But Mara doesn't appear as an obvious enemy. He appears as a voice that sounds reasonable, that presents itself as honest assessment, that claims to be telling you the truth about your limitations. "This teaching is subtle," Mara continued. "It requires capacities you simply don't have. Look at yourself honestly. You're not smart enough for this. Your understanding is limited. Even with your two-finger intelligence, you think you can grasp what has eluded the greatest minds. Give up this impossible pursuit and return to ordinary life where you belong." The insult was deliberate. Two-finger intelligence, a phrase suggesting fundamental incapacity, limited mental ability, inadequacy at the core of who you are. This is the voice many of you hear regularly. Not from an external demon, but from inside your own mind, using your own voice, presenting itself as rational self-assessment, when it's actually the habitual doubt that undermines everything you attempt. Soma didn't argue with Mara. She didn't try to prove her intelligence or defend her capability. She didn't spiral into self-doubt or abandon her practice. Instead, she spoke with absolute clarity. "What does gender have to do with understanding?" she said. "What does any external measure have to do with awakening? When the mind is concentrated, when wisdom is present, when one sees clearly how things actually are, that's what matters. Not the body you're born with, not the intelligence you're measuring, not the worthiness you're questioning." Then she said something that cut through Mara's entire argument. "I know what you are. You're not honest assessment. You're not accurate evaluation. You're doubt itself, trying to masquerade as truth. And I see you clearly." Mara vanished immediately, because doubt can't survive being seen clearly for what it is. Soma continued her practice and reached full awakening shortly after. Not because she had convinced herself she was smart enough, or capable enough, or worthy enough, but because she'd seen through the voice that kept insisting she wasn't. This story maps exactly onto the experience of self-doubt that undermines your efforts before you've even begun. You want to try something new, learn a skill, start a project, pursue an opportunity, speak up in a meeting, create something meaningful. And immediately, a voice arises. "You're not smart enough for this. You don't have what it takes. People like you don't succeed at things like this. You'll embarrass yourself if you try." The voice sounds like honest self-assessment. It presents itself as realistic evaluation, protecting you from inevitable failure. It claims to be telling you the truth about your limitations. But this voice is Mara. It's not accurate assessment. It's habitual doubt wearing the mask of rational thinking. The crucial recognition is that this voice is a mental event, not a truth about your capabilities. It's a thought arising in your mind, shaped by past experiences, old wounds, internalized criticism, and the brain's tendency to predict failure as a form of protection. When Mara told Soma she had two-finger intelligence, he wasn't providing accurate information about her mental capacity. He was deploying a specific kind of attack designed to make her abandon her practice before discovering what she was actually capable of. Your doubt voice does the same thing. "You're not smart enough" isn't a factual assessment of your intelligence. It's a thought pattern trying to keep you from attempting things where you might fail, might be judged, might discover that effort doesn't always lead to immediate success. The thought feels protective. If you don't try, you can't fail. If you accept that you're not capable, you don't have to face the vulnerability of attempting something difficult. The doubt voice offers the false comfort of avoiding risk by avoiding all effort. But what it actually does is keep you trapped. Not trapped by your actual limitations. Everyone has genuine limitations, but trapped by the fear of discovering what you might be capable of if you stopped listening to the voice that insists you're not capable of anything. Notice how Mara's timing was strategic. He didn't appear when Soma first started practicing, when she was a beginner making obvious mistakes. He appeared when she was close to breakthrough, when her understanding had genuinely deepened, when she was on the verge of discovering her actual capacity. The doubt voice operates the same way in your life. It doesn't just whisper constantly in the background. It intensifies at specific moments, right before you're about to speak up, right before you submit your work, right before you take the risk that might lead somewhere meaningful. It shows up strongest not when you're failing, but when success becomes genuinely possible, and that possibility triggers the fear of what success would demand from you. Soma's response shows what breaks this pattern. She didn't argue with Mara about whether she was intelligent enough. She didn't try to prove her worthiness or defend her capability. She didn't gather evidence of past successes to counteract the criticism. She simply recognized the voice for what it was: doubt itself, not truth. And that recognition dissolved its power immediately. When you hear, "You're not smart enough for this, you can do what Soma did," instead of engaging with the content of the thought, arguing whether you are or aren't smart enough, you can recognize the nature of the thought itself. This is Mara. This is the habitual doubt voice. This is the mental pattern that arises whenever you're about to attempt something that involves risk, vulnerability, or the possibility of failure. The thought isn't providing accurate information about your capabilities. It's executing its programmed function, keeping you safe from the vulnerability of trying by convincing you that trying is pointless because you lack the necessary capacity. Soma said, "I know what you are." That knowing, that clear recognition of doubt as doubt rather than truth, is what dissolves its grip. You don't have to believe the thought. You don't have to argue with it. You don't have to prove it wrong. You can simply see it. This is the doubt voice doing what it does. This is Mara telling me I'm not capable as a way of keeping me from attempting what scares me. The recognition itself changes your relationship to the thought. Instead of taking it as accurate assessment of your limitations, you see it as a mental event with a specific function. A function that's trying to protect you through restriction rather than supporting you through encouragement. This doesn't mean ignoring genuine limitations or attempting things you're genuinely unprepared for. Wisdom includes honest assessment of what you currently know and don't know, what you're currently able and unable to do. But there's an enormous difference between honest assessment and the doubt voice. Honest assessment says, "I don't currently have this skill, so I'll need to learn it," or "This task requires knowledge I haven't yet acquired, so I'll need to study first." Honest assessment identifies specific gaps and suggests specific remedies. The doubt voice says, "You're not smart enough," or "You're not the kind of person who succeeds at this," or "You'll never be capable of this." The doubt voice makes global, permanent pronouncements about your fundamental inadequacy. Here's another distinction. Honest assessment feels neutral, even when it identifies significant gaps in your current knowledge. It's information you can work with. The doubt voice feels heavy, defeating, final. It doesn't offer you anything to work with, just a pronouncement that you should give up. Soma understood this distinction perfectly. She didn't claim to already know everything or to have nothing left to learn, but she refused to accept Mara's pronouncement that she was fundamentally incapable of understanding. When the mind is concentrated, when wisdom is present, when one sees clearly, this was her criteria. Not whether she matched some external measure of worthiness, but whether she was actually doing the work that led to understanding. You can apply the same criteria. Instead of asking, "Am I smart enough?" you can ask, "Am I doing the work that develops the capacity I need?" Instead of accepting the global pronouncement, "You're not capable," you can identify specific skills to develop. "I don't currently understand this concept, so I'll study it," or "I haven't practiced this skill enough yet, so I'll practice more." The shift is from fixed pronouncements about permanent inadequacy to accurate assessment of current state, plus recognition that capacities can be developed through effort. Mara wants you to believe you're trapped by permanent limitations. Soma knew that understanding develops through practice, wisdom grows through effort, and capability expands through engagement with challenge. She also knew something else crucial. Doubt itself is not evidence of inadequacy. When the doubt voice arises, you often take its presence as proof that it's telling the truth. I must not be capable. Look how much doubt I'm feeling. But doubt is a mental habit, not an accurate gauge of your actual capacity. Highly capable people experience intense doubt. People who've achieved remarkable things often struggle with voices telling them they're not good enough. The presence of the doubt voice doesn't tell you anything about your actual capabilities. It tells you that your mind has learned to doubt as a protective strategy. Soma experienced Mara's voice just as she was approaching genuine breakthrough. The doubt didn't arise because she was failing. It arose because she was succeeding, and Mara's function is to prevent success by undermining confidence before breakthrough can occur. Your doubt voice often intensifies exactly when you're about to make progress. It shows up strongest when you're attempting something meaningful, something that matters to you, something where success would require you to expand beyond your current sense of who you are. This is not evidence that you should stop. This is evidence that you're attempting something significant enough to trigger the protective mechanism that wants to keep you safe through limitation. Soma's final insight was the most important. She continued her practice despite the doubt voice. She didn't wait until she felt confident. She didn't postpone her efforts until the doubt resolved. She simply continued doing what led to understanding, and the doubt eventually dissolved on its own because it couldn't survive contact with actual experience of growing capability. This is the path through doubt. Not arguing with it, not trying to feel differently, but continuing the work despite the voice that says you're not capable. Each time you proceed despite the doubt, you gather evidence that the doubt voice is not an accurate predictor of your actual capacity. You learn that "I'm not smart enough" is a thought, not a fact. You discover that capability develops through engagement, not through waiting until you feel capable enough to begin. The doubt voice will still arise tomorrow. It will still tell you you're not smart enough, not capable enough, not the kind of person who succeeds. But each time you recognize it as Mara rather than truth, each time you continue your work despite its presence, its grip weakens slightly. Not because you've defeated it, but because you've stopped giving it authority over what you attempt. Tonight, when the voice arises telling you you're not smart enough, not capable enough, not the kind of person who succeeds at what you're attempting, remember Soma sitting under her tree. Remember that she recognized the voice for what it was. Not honest assessment, but doubt trying to masquerade as truth. Remember that she didn't argue with it or try to prove it wrong. She simply saw it clearly. I know what you are. And that seeing dissolved its power. You can do the same. When the doubt voice speaks, you can recognize it. This is Mara. This is the habitual doubt pattern. This is not accurate assessment of my capabilities. This is the protective mechanism trying to keep me safe through limitation. Then you can continue your work. Not because you feel confident, not because the doubt has resolved, but because you've recognized that the doubt voice is not an authority on what you're capable of. Your capability isn't determined by how the doubt voice evaluates you. It's determined by whether you do the work that develops capacity, the study, the practice, the engagement with challenge, the willingness to learn from failure rather than treating failure as confirmation of permanent inadequacy. Soma reached awakening not because she convinced herself she was smart enough. She reached it because she saw through the voice that kept insisting she wasn't, and continued her practice despite doubt's attempts to undermine her. The same path is available to you. See doubt clearly when it arises. Recognize it as Mara, not truth. Then continue your work, despite its presence. That's how the voice loses its grip, not through being defeated in argument, but through being seen clearly, and then proven wrong, through actual engagement with what you're capable of learning. A merchant traveled through the forest, carrying valuable goods to sell in the next city. The journey was long, and as evening approached, he decided to rest beside a clear pool of water. As he sat by the pool's edge, he saw something that made his blood run cold. There, in the water, was a tiger, enormous, teeth bared, ready to attack. The merchant leapt to his feet in terror. He grabbed his possessions and ran blindly into the darkening forest, crashing through undergrowth, stumbling over roots, fleeing from the certain death he'd seen reflected in the water. He ran until exhaustion forced him to stop. His valuable goods were scattered behind him, lost in his panicked flight. His clothes were torn. His body was covered in scratches from thorns and branches. And he was completely lost, alone in the dark forest, with no idea how to find his way back to the road. Hours later, another traveler came to the same pool. This traveler was thirsty and knelt at the water's edge to drink. He too saw the tiger in the water, the same fierce image that had sent the merchant fleeing in terror. But this traveler didn't run. Instead, he looked up. There, in the tree above the pool, a tiger slept peacefully on a high branch. The fierce, attacking tiger in the water was simply the sleeping tiger's reflection, distorted by ripples, made menacing by the viewer's interpretation of what they were seeing. The sleeping tiger posed no threat. It was resting after a meal, completely uninterested in the human below. The merchant had fled from a distorted reflection of something that wasn't actually threatening him. The traveler drank from the pool, rested peacefully for the night, and continued his journey the next morning. The merchant, meanwhile, spent days finding his way back to the road, having lost everything he'd carried and gained nothing but exhaustion and injury from fleeing a danger that existed only in reflection. This teaching story captures exactly how you relate to your thoughts most of the time. A thought arises. I'm going to fail at this. They're judging me. Something terrible is about to happen. I'm not good enough. And you react to it as if it's an accurate representation of reality. You don't pause to examine whether the thought is true. You don't look up to see what's actually there. You see the reflection and immediately flee, defend, attack, or collapse based on what the thought is telling you. The merchant saw a fierce tiger in the water and ran without investigating further. You see a threatening thought in your mind and react without investigating whether it accurately reflects reality. But here's what the teaching reveals. Thoughts are reflections, not reality itself. When you think, I'm going to fail at this, that thought is not a fact about the future. It's a mental event arising in the present moment, shaped by past experiences, current anxiety, habitual patterns of prediction, but it's not an accurate preview of what will actually happen. When you think, they're judging me, that thought is not direct access to what's occurring in someone else's mind. It's your interpretation, your projection, your fear taking the form of a confident pronouncement about what others are thinking. The thought feels real. It feels like truth. It appears in your consciousness with such immediacy and certainty that questioning it seems absurd. The merchant saw the tiger in the water with his own eyes. Of course it was real. You hear the thought in your own mind with complete clarity. Of course it's accurate. But the tiger in the water was a reflection, distorted by ripples and misinterpreted by fear. And the thought in your mind is also a reflection, a mental representation of reality, not reality itself, distorted by cognitive biases and emotional states and habitual patterns of interpretation. The crucial difference between the merchant and the second traveler wasn't that one was smarter or braver. The difference was that one believed the reflection immediately while the other paused to investigate what was actually there. You can cultivate the same capacity. When a thought arises, instead of immediately believing it and reacting to it, you can pause and recognize, this is a thought. This is a mental event. This is not necessarily an accurate representation of reality. This recognition, this simple seeing that thoughts are mental events rather than facts, changes everything. The merchant experienced real terror, real exhaustion, real loss, all because he believed a reflection without investigating the reality it supposedly represented. You experience real anxiety, real suffering, real limitation, much of it because you believe thoughts without investigating whether they accurately reflect what's actually true. Consider what happens when the thought, "I'm going to fail," arises. If you believe it immediately, your body responds as if failure is already happening. Your stress levels spike. Your confidence drops. Your performance often deteriorates because you're operating from a state of anticipated failure rather than present moment engagement with the task. You might even avoid the task entirely, creating actual failure by fleeing from the thought of failure. But if you recognize the thought as a mental event rather than a prophecy, something different becomes possible. I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. This is a more accurate description of what's actually happening. A thought has arisen in your mind. That's all. It might be accurate, or it might not be. It's a prediction your mind has generated, not a fact about what will happen. From that recognition, you can investigate. Is this thought based on actual evidence, or is it based on habitual anxiety? What's actually true about this situation right now? What concrete actions would address any real challenges I'm facing? This is what the second traveler did. He saw the reflection, then looked up to see what was actually there. He didn't deny that he'd seen a tiger in the water. He had. But he didn't stop at the reflection. He investigated further and discovered the gap between the distorted reflection and the actual reality. The practice isn't about stopping thoughts or changing them or only thinking positive thoughts. It's about recognizing thoughts, as mental events that arise and pass, that may or may not accurately represent reality, that you can observe rather than automatically believe. Right now, as you listen to these words, thoughts are arising in your mind. Maybe thoughts agreeing with what's being said. Maybe thoughts disagreeing. Maybe thoughts about something completely unrelated. These thoughts appear in your awareness, and normally you'd identify with them completely. You'd become them, believe them, react to them as if they're truth. But you can also observe them. You can notice a thought of agreement just arose. A thought of skepticism just arose. A thought about tomorrow's meeting just arose. The thoughts are mental events occurring in your awareness, but you, the awareness itself, are not identical to the thoughts. This distinction is subtle, but revolutionary. When you're identified with thoughts, you are your thoughts. When the thought, "I'm inadequate," arises, you become inadequate. When the thought, "I'm anxious," arises, you become anxiety itself. There's no gap between the thought and your sense of self. But when you observe thoughts, you're the awareness that notices thoughts arising and passing. When the thought, "I'm inadequate," arises, you can observe the inadequacy thought is present again. Interesting how reliably it shows up in certain situations. You're no longer the thought, you're the awareness that witnesses the thought's appearance. The merchant was completely identified with his interpretation of what he saw. There was no gap between seeing the reflection and believing it represented an attacking tiger. The interpretation and the reality collapsed into one, and he reacted to his interpretation as if it were fact. The second traveler maintained a gap. He saw the reflection, recognized it as a reflection, and investigated what it was reflecting. He didn't deny his perception, but he didn't immediately collapse his perception into reality without further investigation. You can practice this same gap. When a thought arises, instead of becoming it, you can notice it. The judgment thought is here. The anxiety thought is here. The catastrophe thought is here. You're naming what's present in your awareness without becoming what you're naming. This doesn't make difficult thoughts pleasant. The thought, "I'm going to fail," still carries emotional charge. But there's a profound difference between being that thought, collapsing into identification with failure, and observing that thought as a mental event that's currently present. One keeps you trapped in the content of the thought. The other gives you space to see the thought clearly and respond wisely rather than reacting automatically. The merchant's reaction was automatic. He saw the tiger and ran without conscious choice, driven by the survival instinct, triggered by his interpretation. Hours later, lost in the forest, he might have regretted his panicked flight. But in the moment, there was no gap between perception and reaction. The second traveler had a gap. He saw the tiger, felt the instinctive fear response, and paused long enough to investigate before reacting. That pause made all the difference. You can cultivate that same pause. When a threatening thought arises, you can notice the impulse to believe it and react to it, and in that noticing, create a small gap where wisdom can operate. In that gap, you can ask, is this thought accurate? Is this thought helpful? Is this thought based on current reality or past experience? What would change if I didn't believe this thought right now? These questions aren't intellectual exercises. They're the practical application of seeing thoughts as mental events rather than as truth. The merchant spent days recovering from his flight from a reflection. He lost his goods, his time, his peace of mind, all because he couldn't distinguish between a distorted reflection and reality. How much of your life is spent fleeing from, fighting with, or being controlled by thoughts that are distorted reflections rather than accurate representations of what's actually happening? How much anxiety is generated by believing predictions about the future that haven't happened yet? How much anger is triggered by believing interpretations of others' intentions that may not be accurate? How much shame comes from believing harsh self-judgments that describe distorted reflections of who you are, rather than the complex reality? The teaching isn't that thoughts are always wrong. Sometimes the reflection in the water accurately shows what's above it. Sometimes your thoughts accurately represent reality. The teaching is that thoughts are reflections, not reality itself, and wisdom requires investigating whether the reflection is accurate before reacting to it as if it's fact. The second traveler's investigation was simple. He looked up. That's all it took. One moment of checking the reflection against reality. Your investigation can be equally simple. When a thought arises that triggers strong emotion or compulsive reaction, pause and check. Is this thought describing what's actually happening right now, or is it a prediction, interpretation, judgment, or memory? Most thoughts that cause suffering are not descriptions of present moment reality. They're predictions about the future, interpretations of ambiguous situations, judgments based on old stories about yourself, memories replayed as if they're still happening. When you see this clearly, when you recognize thoughts as mental events rather than as reality, something fundamental shifts. You're no longer trapped by your thoughts because you're no longer identified with them. You're the awareness that witnesses thoughts arising and passing, and from that awareness, you can choose how to respond rather than reacting automatically. Tonight, practice what the second traveler practiced. When a thought arises that normally would capture you completely, pause and recognize this is a thought. This is a mental event. This is a reflection that may or may not accurately represent reality. Then investigate. Look up from the reflection to see what's actually there. Check the thought against present moment reality rather than believing it automatically. You'll find that many thoughts you've been treating as facts are actually interpretations. Many predictions you've been treating as certain futures are actually anxious projections. Many judgments you've been treating as truth are actually old stories running on automatic. And in seeing this, in recognizing thoughts as mental events rather than as reality, you gain the freedom to respond wisely rather than react automatically. You can acknowledge the thought without being controlled by it. You can observe it without becoming it. The merchant lost everything by believing a reflection without investigation. The second traveler lost nothing by taking one moment to look up and see clearly. That same choice is available to you with every thought that arises. Believe the reflection automatically, or pause to investigate what's actually true. React to the mental event as if it's fact, or observe it as a thought arising in awareness. The difference between these two approaches is the difference between being trapped by your thoughts and being free to respond wisely to what's actually happening. The tiger in the water was never attacking. It was sleeping peacefully in the tree. Most of what your thoughts tell you is threatening, inadequate, or catastrophic exists only in reflection, distorted by fear, misinterpreted by habit, believed without investigation. Look up. See what's actually there. Recognize thoughts as thoughts, not as truth. That recognition is the beginning of freedom. A young monk named Santati had everything required for serious practice. He had a quiet monastery, supportive teachers, all the time he needed for meditation, and genuine motivation to understand his mind. But when he sat down to meditate, his mind refused to cooperate. Some days, he'd sit down with clear intention to observe his breath, and within seconds, his mind would be filled with desires. Not just small preferences, but compelling fantasies about the life he'd left behind, specific foods he missed, conversations he wished he could have, experiences he longed for. His body would feel restless, pulled toward pursuing these desires, and his meditation would dissolve into elaborate daydreams about a different life. Other days, the problem wasn't desire, but its opposite. He'd sit down and immediately feel irritation rising, annoyance at the bird sounds outside, resistance to the physical discomfort of sitting, anger at his own inability to concentrate. Everything felt wrong, and his meditation became a battle against everything he was experiencing, rather than clear observation of it. Sometimes a heavy drowsiness would descend the moment he closed his eyes. His mind would feel thick, foggy, unable to maintain attention for more than a few seconds before sliding into a semi-sleep state. He'd jerk awake repeatedly, frustrated by his inability to stay alert, then slide back into the same murky drowsiness. Then there were days when his mind felt like a whirlwind. Thoughts spinning rapidly, anxiety about whether he was doing the practice correctly, worry about what others thought of his progress, planning for later in the day, replaying earlier conversations. His mind wouldn't settle for even a moment, jumping frantically from thought to thought, like a monkey leaping between branches. And underlying all of this was a deeper problem: doubt. Doubt about whether the practice actually worked. Doubt about his own capacity to do it correctly. Doubt about whether he should even be trying this path, or if he'd made a terrible mistake leaving his previous life. The doubt would undermine every attempt to practice, questioning the value of what he was doing, even as he was doing it. After weeks of this struggle, Santati approached his teacher in desperation. "I can't meditate," he said. "Every time I sit down, my mind becomes impossible. I'm worse at this than when I started." His teacher listened quietly, then said, "Describe what happens when you try to meditate." Santati described the desires that pulled him into fantasy, the aversion that turned everything into a problem, the drowsiness that fogged his mind, the restlessness that kept his thoughts spinning, the doubt that questioned everything. "Good," the teacher said. "You're seeing clearly what arises. But these things prevent meditation," Santati protested. "They're obstacles. They make practice impossible." "They're not preventing your meditation," the teacher said. "They are your meditation." These mental states you're describing, desire, aversion, drowsiness, restlessness, doubt, these are what you're here to understand. They're not obstacles to the practice. They're what the practice reveals. Santati sat in confused silence. You think meditation means having a calm, quiet mind? His teacher continued. So when desire arises, you treat it as failure. When aversion appears, you think something's gone wrong. When drowsiness clouds your awareness, you believe you're doing it badly. But these states aren't signs of failure. They're exactly what you're supposed to be seeing clearly. The teacher explained that these 5 states, desire, aversion, drowsiness, restlessness, and doubt, are universal obstacles that arise in every human mind. They're not personal failures. They're not signs that you're bad at practice. They're the common hindrances that cloud clarity for everyone, and learning to recognize them clearly is the practice itself. When desire arises, the teacher said, don't treat it as the enemy. Recognize it. Desire is present now. Observe how it feels in your body, how it captures your attention, how it pulls you into fantasy about the future. See it clearly without following where it wants to lead you. When aversion appears, same thing. Don't fight against the fighting. Simply notice. Aversion is here now. Observe the tension in your body, the way your mind searches for what's wrong, the resistance to what's actually happening. See it operating without being controlled by it. Santati began practicing this way. Instead of treating the hindrances as problems to overcome, he treated them as mental states to observe clearly. When desire arose during meditation, he didn't try to suppress it or feel guilty about it. He simply noted, desire is present. He observed how desire felt, the pulling sensation towards something not here, the way his mind constructed elaborate scenarios about obtaining what it wanted, the restlessness in his body. When he observed desire this way instead of following it or fighting it, something surprising happened. The desire didn't immediately disappear, but his relationship to it changed. He wasn't captured by it anymore. He was aware of it arising and eventually passing, like weather moving through the sky. The same pattern worked with the other hindrances. When aversion appeared, when he felt irritation at sounds or resistance to discomfort, he'd note, aversion is here. He'd observe the contraction in his chest, the tightness in his jaw, the way his mind searched for what to blame. And in that clear seeing, the aversion would gradually release its grip. Drowsiness required a different approach. When the heavy fog descended, he'd open his eyes, stand up, or splash water on his face, practical measures to work with the physical state. But he'd also observe how drowsiness felt, how it dulled his awareness, how it operated as an escape from the discomfort of present moment attention. Restlessness became fascinating to observe. He'd watch his mind jumping from thought to thought, feel the anxiety driving the movement, notice the way restlessness convinced him that something important needed his attention right now. In seeing it clearly, the frantic quality would sometimes settle, not through force, but through being fully seen. Doubt was the trickiest. When doubt arose, "This isn't working, I'm doing it wrong, I should quit," his habit was to engage with the content, to argue with the doubt, or be convinced by it. But when he simply observed, "Doubt is present now," he saw that doubt was just another mental state, not necessarily an accurate assessment of reality. Over time, Santati discovered something profound. The hindrances hadn't gone away completely. Desire still arose, aversion still appeared, drowsiness still clouded his mind sometimes. But they no longer controlled him, because he'd learned to see them as temporary mental states, rather than as truth about himself or his practice. This teaching directly addresses what happens in your daily life when your mind refuses to settle. You sit down to focus on important work, and immediately desire pulls your attention elsewhere. You want to check your phone, browse the internet, get a snack, talk to someone, anything other than the task in front of you. The desire feels compelling, and you either follow it or spend your energy fighting it. Or you're trying to relax after a difficult day, and aversion fills your mind. Everything irritates you. The noise from the neighbors, the temperature of the room, your partner's innocent comment. Your mind is searching for what's wrong, turning everything into a problem, and you can't settle into peace because you're in constant resistance to what is. Or you need to make an important decision, and drowsiness descends. Your mind fogs over. You can't think clearly. You feel an overwhelming urge to sleep or zone out. What you don't recognize is that drowsiness is often your mind's escape mechanism when something feels too difficult or uncomfortable to face directly. Or you're lying in bed trying to sleep, and restlessness takes over. Your mind spins through tomorrow's tasks, replays today's conversations, plans elaborate futures, worries about unlikely disasters. The more you try to stop the spinning, the faster it seems to move. And running underneath all of this might be doubt. Doubt about whether you're making the right choices, whether you're capable of what you're attempting, whether anything you're doing matters. The doubt undermines your efforts, even as you're making them, questioning whether there's any point in trying. These 5 states, desire, aversion, drowsiness, restlessness, doubt, are exactly what Santati encountered. They're universal obstacles to clarity and peace. They arise in every human mind, not because you're doing something wrong, but because this is how minds operate when they're not trained to see clearly. The usual approach is to fight these states or be controlled by them. You try to suppress desire, eliminate aversion, power through drowsiness, force your mind to stop spinning, convince yourself out of doubt, or you give up and let these states run your life, following every desire, indulging every aversion, escaping into drowsiness, being swept along by restlessness, paralyzed by doubt. Santati's teacher offered a third option: see these states clearly, without being controlled by them. When desire arises, you can notice desire is present. Not, I want this and must have it. Not, I'm bad for wanting this, but simply, desire is present in my awareness right now. This recognition creates space between you and the desire. You're no longer identified with it. You're the awareness that notices desire arising. From that space, you can observe how desire operates, how it pulls your attention toward what's not here, how it creates restlessness in your body, how it spins stories about how much better life would be if only you had what you want. And in that clear seeing, you're not controlled by it. The same process works with the other hindrances. Aversion is present. Drowsiness is here. Restlessness is operating. Doubt has arisen. Each recognition names what's happening without becoming it, creating the space where wisdom can operate. This isn't suppression. You're not trying to push the states away or pretend they're not there. You're seeing them clearly, fully, with honest recognition of what's present. And it's not indulgence. You're not following where desire wants to lead, believing what doubt claims, or being swept along by restlessness. You're observing the state without being controlled by it. Santati discovered that these hindrances lose much of their power when they're seen clearly. Not because seeing them makes them vanish instantly, but because seeing them prevents you from being unconsciously driven by them. Desire still arises in his mind, but now he recognizes it as desire arising, not as truth about what he needs. Aversion still appears, but now he sees it as aversion operating, not as accurate assessment that everything is wrong. Doubt still whispers its undermining messages, but now he knows doubt as a mental state, not as wise counsel about what's possible. You can develop the same clarity. When your mind refuses to settle, when these familiar obstacles arise, you can practice what Santati learned. Recognize what's present without fighting it or following it. Desire is here right now. Feel it. See it clearly, but don't follow where it wants to lead you. Aversion is operating right now. Notice the resistance, the searching for what's wrong, but don't let it control your response to what's happening. Drowsiness is present. See it. Take practical steps if needed to increase alertness, but recognize it as a mental state rather than an accurate message that you should escape. Restlessness is here. Watch the mind spinning. Feel the anxiety underneath, but don't be swept along by the frantic movement. Doubt has arisen. Hear its questioning. Recognize its undermining quality, but don't mistake it for wisdom or accurate assessment. Each clear recognition creates a small gap between the hindrance and your response to it. In that gap, freedom lives. Freedom to respond wisely, rather than being unconsciously driven by whatever state happens to be present. Tonight, when you notice your mind refusing to settle, remember Santati's discovery. The obstacles aren't signs of failure. They're not evidence that something's wrong with you. They're universal mental states that cloud clarity for everyone, and learning to recognize them clearly is how you stop being controlled by them. You don't need perfect concentration or an obstacle-free mind. You need clear recognition of what's actually present. Desire is here. Aversion is operating. Drowsiness has descended. Restlessness is spinning. Doubt is whispering. Name what's present. See it clearly. And that clear seeing itself changes your relationship to it. You're no longer unconsciously driven by these states because you've learned to recognize them as temporary mental events rather than as truth about yourself or reality. That recognition, simple, direct, honest, is what transforms obstacles into opportunities for understanding. The hindrances don't disappear, but they lose their power to run your life without your awareness. And that shift from being controlled to being aware is the beginning of genuine freedom. Puna woke before dawn every day to the same brutal reality. She was a slave in a wealthy household, owned like property, worked until her body screamed for rest, then worked more. Her hands were calloused and scarred from endless labor. Her back was marked from beatings when her work wasn't fast enough or perfect enough. She'd known nothing but servitude since childhood, treated as less than human by people who saw her only as a tool to be used. She had no education, no social standing, no freedom, no hope that her circumstances would ever change. According to the rigid social hierarchy of her time, she was at the absolute bottom, untouchable, unworthy, fundamentally contaminated by the lowness of her birth. When Buddhist monks came to the household to teach, Puna listened from the kitchen where she prepared their meals. The teaching spoke about freedom, about awakening, about the possibility of liberation from suffering. But surely these teachings weren't meant for someone like her. One day, she gathered courage to approach one of the teachers. "Can someone like me practice?" she asked quietly, expecting rejection. "Someone with my background, my circumstances, my contamination?" The teacher looked at her directly. Perhaps for the first time, anyone in that household had truly looked at her as a person. "Your mind," he said, "is like the sky. Clouds pass through it, dark clouds, heavy clouds, storm clouds, but they don't stain the sky itself. The sky remains fundamentally clear regardless of what passes through it. Puna didn't understand. Her life had been nothing but dark clouds. How could her mind be compared to a clear sky? Everything you've experienced, the teacher continued, all the suffering, all the mistreatment, all the conditioning about your unworthiness, these are events that have happened to you. But they're not what you fundamentally are. Beneath all the accumulated pain and all the stories you've been told about yourself, your basic awareness remains untouched, pristine, capable of freedom. Puna began practicing with whatever time she could steal from her endless work. Minutes before dawn, moments during brief rest periods, late at night when her body was exhausted, but her mind was alert. She discovered something astonishing. When she observed her mind directly, not the thoughts about herself, not the painful memories, not the shame and conditioning, but the awareness itself that witnessed all of this, she found something that her circumstances hadn't touched. The awareness that noticed her thoughts was not damaged by those thoughts. The awareness that experienced pain was not itself painful. The awareness that witnessed shame was not itself ashamed. There was something in her that remained fundamentally clear, like the sky the teacher had described. This didn't make her suffering disappear. Her circumstances remained brutal. Her body still ached from overwork. The social conditioning still whispered that she was worthless. But she'd discovered something within herself that wasn't defined by any of this. She practiced observing the difference between what happened in her awareness and the awareness itself. Painful thoughts arose. She could see them arising in awareness. Memories of mistreatment surfaced. She could observe them appearing in awareness. Feelings of shame and worthlessness emerged. She could watch them moving through awareness. But the awareness that witnessed all of this remained unchanged, untouched, fundamentally clear. Within months, Puna reached complete awakening. Not because her circumstances had improved, she was still a slave. Not because her past had been erased, those experiences remained part of her history. But because she discovered that her fundamental nature was never contaminated by anything that had happened to her. The awareness at her core, the basic capacity to be conscious, to witness, to know, had been present and pristine through all of it. The suffering was real. The mistreatment was real. But these things had moved through her awareness, like clouds through sky. They hadn't stained what she essentially was. This teaching directly challenges one of the deepest sources of negative thinking, the belief that your past has fundamentally damaged or contaminated you. You think, I've experienced too much trauma to be truly whole. My childhood ruined me. I've made too many mistakes to deserve peace. My life experiences have broken something essential in me that can't be fixed. These thoughts treat your past experiences as if they've permanently stained your fundamental nature. As if difficult experiences have contaminated what you are at your core, leaving you irreparably damaged. But Puna's discovery reveals something radically different. Your awareness itself, the basic capacity to be conscious, to experience, to witness what arises, is not damaged by what it witnesses. Traumatic experiences create painful memories, difficult emotions, conditioned patterns of thought and behavior. These are real, and they can cause genuine suffering, but they don't contaminate the awareness that experiences them. Think about the sky metaphor the teacher offered. A terrible storm passes through the sky. Dark clouds, heavy rain, lightning, thunder. The storm is intense and real. But when the storm passes, the sky itself is unchanged. The sky didn't become stormy in its essential nature. It remained what it always was: clear, open space through which weather moves. Your awareness is like this. Difficult experiences have moved through it. Trauma, loss, shame, pain, conditioning about your unworthiness. These experiences were real, and their effects are real, but they haven't changed the fundamental nature of the awareness that experienced them. Puna had experienced as much suffering as a human could endure. Slavery, physical abuse, social rejection, being treated as subhuman for her entire life. If anyone's fundamental nature should have been contaminated or broken by their experiences, it would be hers. But when she looked directly at her own awareness, she found it untouched. Not untouched in the sense of being unaffected. The pain was real, but untouched in the sense that the awareness itself retained its basic clarity, its capacity for freedom, its pristine nature. This is true for you as well. Whatever you've experienced, however difficult your past has been, the awareness at your core, the basic knowing quality that allows you to be conscious, has not been fundamentally damaged. Painful memories exist. They arise in awareness, and when they arise, you experience the pain associated with them. But notice, the awareness that experiences painful memories is not itself a painful memory. It's the clear space in which memories appear. Difficult emotions arise. Shame, fear, grief, these move through your awareness, and you feel them fully. But the awareness that feels shame is not itself ashamed. The awareness that feels fear is not itself afraid. It's the space in which emotions arise and pass. Negative thoughts about yourself appear. I'm damaged. I'm broken. I'm worthless. These thoughts arise in consciousness. But notice, the awareness that witnesses these thoughts is not damaged, broken, or worthless. It's the clear capacity to know that these thoughts are present. This distinction is crucial. You are not the traumatic memories that arise in awareness. You are the awareness in which those memories appear. You are not the painful emotions. You are the awareness that feels them. You are not the negative thoughts about yourself. You are the awareness that witnesses those thoughts. And that awareness, your fundamental capacity to be conscious, has never been damaged by anything it has witnessed. Puna discovered this while still in slavery, still experiencing daily mistreatment, still surrounded by a society that insisted she was fundamentally contaminated. Her external circumstances hadn't validated her worthiness. Her past hadn't been erased or healed, but she'd found what was never contaminated in the first place, the pristine awareness at her core. This doesn't minimize trauma or suggest that difficult experiences don't matter. Trauma creates real suffering, real challenges, real patterns that need attention and often professional support. But it does challenge the belief that trauma has fundamentally broken something essential in you that can never be whole again. It reveals that beneath the trauma, beneath the conditioning, beneath all the stories about damage and contamination, your basic awareness remains clear. You can explore this directly right now. Notice that you're aware of reading these words. Something in you knows that these words are appearing in your consciousness. That knowing capacity, that basic awareness, is what you fundamentally are. Now notice, is that awareness damaged? Not whether painful thoughts or memories are present in it, but is the awareness itself damaged? Is the basic capacity to know, to be conscious, fundamentally broken? When you look directly, you'll find what Puna found. The awareness itself is clear, pristine, untouched by what it witnesses. Difficult content arises in it, painful memories, harsh self-judgments, traumatic recollections, but the awareness that holds all of this remains fundamentally clear. This recognition doesn't erase your history or eliminate the need to work with trauma's effects, but it does reveal that you're not fundamentally damaged at your core, no matter what you've experienced. Puna's story is especially powerful because her circumstances were so extreme. If she could discover pristine awareness while being enslaved, beaten, and treated as subhuman, then this discovery is available regardless of how difficult your experiences have been. The awareness that knows your pain is not itself in pain. The awareness that witnesses your shame is not itself ashamed. The awareness that sees your broken pieces is not itself broken. It's the clear, open space, like sky, in which all of these experiences arise and pass. This understanding transforms how you relate to negative thinking about yourself. When the thought arises, "My past has ruined me," you can recognize this as a thought appearing in awareness. The thought itself might carry emotional weight, might feel true, might be supported by painful memories. But the awareness, witnessing this thought, is not ruined. It remains clear, capable of knowing that this thought is present. When shame arises about past mistakes or experiences, you can recognize shame as an emotion moving through awareness. The emotion is real, the pain is real, but the awareness experiencing the shame is not itself contaminated by shame. It's the pristine space in which shame appears, exists for a time, and eventually passes. Puna practiced this recognition constantly. In the midst of her daily suffering, she'd notice, there's pain arising in awareness. There's the thought, I'm worthless, appearing in awareness. There's shame moving through awareness. And in that noticing, she remained connected to the awareness itself, the part of her that was never contaminated. You can practice the same recognition. When difficult thoughts about yourself arise, notice them as events in awareness rather than as truth about awareness. The thought, I'm damaged, is appearing in my awareness right now. This statement is more accurate than I'm damaged because it distinguishes between content arising in consciousness and the consciousness itself. When painful memories surface, notice them as memories appearing in present moment awareness. A memory of past trauma is arising now. The memory is real. The trauma was real. But notice that the awareness holding this memory right now is present, clear, functioning, not trapped in the past, not broken by what it remembers. Gradually, this practice reveals what Puna discovered. You are not your history, not your trauma, not your mistakes, not your conditioning. You are the awareness in which all of this appears. And that awareness has never been fundamentally damaged, no matter what has moved through it. Tonight, when negative thoughts about your past arise, remember Puna in the kitchen of her master's house, discovering freedom while still in chains. Remember that she found pristine awareness, not by changing her circumstances or erasing her history, but by recognizing what was never contaminated in the first place. Your circumstances might be difficult. Your history might include real trauma. Your conditioning might run deep. But the awareness at your core, the basic capacity to know, to be conscious, to witness, remains clear like sky through which all weather passes. You are not what happened to you. You are the awareness that experienced what happened. And that awareness is pristine, untouched, capable of freedom, regardless of what has moved through it. This is what Puna discovered, and what remains available to you in this moment. The recognition that your fundamental nature was never damaged, never contaminated, never broken. The clouds are real, the storms are real, but the sky itself remains clear. And you are the sky, not the weather passing through it. You've seen how negative thinking operates through different forms: harsh self-judgment, catastrophic predictions, endless rumination, appearance obsession, crippling doubt, believing every thought, being trapped by mental obstacles, and believing your past